Welcome to The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Ralph Russo, here with my colleagues from The Athletic, Stuart Mandel and Bruce Feldman. Don't forget, every episode of this show is now on YouTube. Yes, you can watch us and see our beautiful faces. Find us on youtube.com/@audibleshow. As the kids say, smash that subscribe button, please. Make it a habit of going there as much as you can. And you can join us live on Sunday mornings when we break down all the action from Saturday's game, 8:30 a.m. Pacific time, Sunday mornings. We are live on YouTube. And of course, find us where you find all your podcasts. Later in the show, we are going to do some breakout players. We are going to answer mailbag questions. Got some interesting ones this week, including maybe a little bit of a deep dive on LSU and their offensive problems that Brian Kelly doesn't want to talk about. But first, we have Gary Danielson, an interview with, a guy who's become a legend in broadcasting, right? We have an interview with Gary Danielson from CBS. He is winding down an amazing career, and we talked to him about his career, his playing career, and who he thought was maybe the greatest player he's ever seen.
All right, guys, we're pleased to be joined by our guest, the esteemed Gary Danielson, in his 36th year. This is going to be his final season broadcasting games on college football. He started back in 1990, so he predates us covering the sport. Gary, first of all, I want to thank you because when I ran into you this summer at Big Ten Media Days, you told, it was touching to hear that you are a loyal listener of the show, that it's always a pleasant surprise whenever you run into somebody who you know in the sport like that actually listens. So yeah. Thank you.
Well, hopefully. It was weird being in Vegas, so see a familiar face was always nice, like that. So
I appreciate that. Before we came on, I was this week I was Googling around and looking, and I had no idea that before you were a TV announcer and after you played at Purdue, you were once a Charlotte Hornet before you even in the NFL. Like, what's the story there?
We're going back.
We're going way back. Yeah.
Yeah. My career was checkered, to be kind, I guess. I can maybe take a half step back. This week, I'm in the Purdue Hall of Fame, and which is weird a little bit because I wasn't that great in college. And then they wanted to honor me at the Purdue game this week. And I was like, I don't know, I look back on my college career, it was very unfulfilling. I feel like I let it down all of my teammates. I didn't play as well as I could have or should have. And we had a really good team. Our freshman team had Otis Armstrong, Dave Butts, Daryl Stingley, Greg Bingham. We were loaded, and I just didn't live up to what I could have. And so, but then I kind of rationalized, Bruce, that it's better to be honored by Purdue for being proud of what you did after you were in college than just for what you did in college. So I said, okay, if they're proud of me, I'm happy to do this. But my trail was crazy. And, I didn't get drafted the first year I tried out in Canada. I got married right away, tried out in Canada, didn't make it, became a GA, worked, actually I was Rick Venturi's GA at Purdue, and Rick went on to an interesting record, but he's still doing it. He was a really good coach though. And then I went into the World Football League. That was strange because I was on two teams that went bankrupt in the middle of the year and traveled around, and then got a shot to try out, which I really wanted to do, which was strange part of that is I had an intervention by people who, knew me, loved my wife, asked me to, you're chasing a dream that's impossible. And these were NFL coaches and scouts and my ex-coaches and I thought they were kind of right, but I wanted to try out in the NFL. So it ended up, I fought through that for 4 years before I got in, and then 13 years of NFL ball. So I've just about seen everything, basically.
That is an incredible path. And again, to a really long and productive NFL career, to start from that path is pretty wild. So we're glad you stuck with your dream. What I was wondering, what we wanted to pivot to, is then your broadcasting career.
Right.
When you step into that, I think a lot of athletes decide, hey, yeah, I'll try this. This seems like a good way to, if nothing else, like cash a couple of checks, kill some time. I wonder, like, how did you enter broadcasting, and what was your approach? Did you think of it as like, oh, this is my next long-term career, or were you just going to see and like, well, let's see where this goes?
Not exactly, Ralph, but I was, I guess, pretty good at answering questions as a quarterback. When you play for a losing team and you're the quarterback, you get a lot of tough questions after games, and you have to answer questions smartly. You can't throw teammates under the bus. You have to be a leader. You have to understand who's listening to you. So a lot of those interviews led me to get an opportunity to be on TV. I was the co-host of the Detroit Easter Seal Telethon with one of the icons in Detroit, Mort Krim. And it just kind of happened. I was there as a guest, and somebody got sick, and they said that Mort couldn't do it. Could you stand in from like 11 until 2 and do it? And I did that, and they just said, why don't you come back? So I got some TV experience locally, not doing games, but locally, and did always, I don't know if you recognize the name, like J.P. McCarthy's radio show in Detroit was one of the iconic radio shows on WJR, and I was on there a guest a lot. So I was used to talking, but then got an opportunity to interview for a job at ESPN. And I actually went to try to get what I heard, and what I was brought in for was a sideline reporting job. I thought I could do that. And I did an interview the first week in August, and I was hired as the lead analyst for the first game less than a month later to do the Nebraska-Baylor game with Tom Osborne. And that was being thrown into a whole different situation with Tom there in Nebraska and everything like that. So it was quite a first game, to say the least. So it's fun to go back. I've been there since. We did some Nick Solich games, but it's funny you asked that, because now, as I look back, two things kind of stand out to me. One was I had never watched one college football game in the 16 years that I was out. I was trying to make the NFL, or I was working. We had no money, my wife and I was a GA during the week. So I worked on weekends and made whatever I could. But then when I was playing, I didn't have time. I was competing against Dan Fouts or Roger Staubach or Fran Tarkington, and so I never watched one game. And the first time I turned on a tape, I went, holy cow, these guys are terrible. What am I going to say? That was, and then the second was, how come I wasn't better than this when I was in college? I must have really been bad. Honestly, I called my friend and I go, I'm nervous about, can I find anything positive to say? Because everybody looked open. The coverages were obvious. I was struck the simplicity. Now that has since changed. The two games are more closer together. And then the next thing I was struck about is just being on TV and, having people say to me, like Brent Musburger say, quarterback, you can say whatever you want, but there's two things. You've got 13 seconds. And if it's not interesting or funny, I'm not coming back to you again. And that's kind of how it was in those early days, when Ness and I did it first in the Big Ten, and then we were switched a little bit. And I did it with Brent, but it really turned out to be fun and something. And I guess the next thing, as I talk to people that get into broadcasting now, and a lot of them call me, people that you guys work with and that have called me to pick my brain. I always say I would not hire anybody that couldn't go on and do one of these games with blindfolded stepping off a spaceship, because you have to have some sense of being able to talk and watch a game and explain things, or tell why. I think part of it just comes naturally. There is homework obviously involved to do it right, but you also have to have a flair for it, I think. So it came a little bit easy for me.
Gary, you've done this. You said this is your 36th year doing this. You were at ABC originally, ESPN, and then ABC for a long time. But I think most fans, and I will be one of these, is associate you with the SEC.
Of course.
I didn't realize this until I was looking at the chronology, but like your first year calling the SEC for CBS was in 2006. And I think of 2006 as the season where the SEC launched into, what was it, 8 straight national champions. Like that's the season where the narrative began that the SEC is the best conference. And I'm wondering what that period was like. I mean, you're talking like peak Tim Tebow, eventually Cam Newton, like what it was like kind of having a front row seat to that era.
So you guys, I listen to you, Stu, Bruce, Ralph, you all are great. I mean, I could not do what you do. The homework you put in and the people you talk to is fantastic. But Stu, I'm a little surprised that I actually thought you were going to bring up that kind of the watershed of that 2006 season was the controversy from where I had come from, the Big Ten, and whether Michigan was going to go or Florida was going to go. And I was in the center of that hurricane. You know, my first year, we were doing the SEC championship game, and all week I had become enamored with, and I prepped all week for the possibility. Remember, Pitt beat West Virginia. And that I was thinking all week, because the national papers, that's when it was just the USA Today, and there, wasn't like it was today. That what would happen if USC lost? And that ended up happening halfway in our game when we were doing that SEC championship versus Arkansas. And I came out on TV and said, I know everybody thinks Michigan and Ohio State are the 2 best, but are you sure the SEC team shouldn't be involved in this? And then it became the whole, I'm sure you guys remember this, is it eyeballs or is it, your resume? And that was that whole thing. But the reason I was caught in the middle of it is the SEC people hated me because I was from the Big Ten, and the Big Ten people began hating me because I said the SEC should go. Now, I didn't know who the best team was, but I kind of went with the purpose and that if you win your championship, that should be the tiebreaker in this thing. And I think resume has become more, and I'm pretty good at studying tape, and I lived it. I always felt like if I can't tell who are the best teams, I'm pretty sure that the athletic directors people can't tell who the best team is. And that's how I've always, some people believe the opposite. I have nothing against it. I mean, we all know who it was, but I could see that the SEC was playing a brand of football that at least deserved to be. And remember, 2 years earlier, that undefeated Auburn team didn't get in the championship. So there were a lot of raw edges at that time. And those were interesting times as Verne and I were surfing into those 8 straight championships. And, Nick was coming to Alabama and Twitter was exploding at the same time. And I kind of became a central figure I kidded a lot of people that Elon Musk, when he bought Twitter and turned it into X, he was not aware that I was leaving Twitter and that half of his tweets on Saturdays were going to go away. So it's a different life. As you guys probably know, during SEC football, it is very tribal there, and people who are making calls receive a lot of action in that conference.
So to go from that long extended period where the SEC was, I feel like every week, right? You were doing the number 1 game. It was usually national championship implications. Unfortunately, CBS lost the SEC. So you're back doing the Big Ten, and it's not their number 1 game. Like you were at a USC Purdue game last week. Did that contribute in any way to you deciding when to step away? That it's kind of
No, not really. The games that Ness and I did, we first got the job of doing the noon game for ESPN, and we were there in, I think it was 92 when Barry was starting to build that Wisconsin team, and those weren't prime national games. Keith and Greasy were doing the prime game for ABC, but God, I just loved those games. You know, we were doing Barry Alvarez. We were doing Iowa there with Hayden Fry. We were doing Ohio State and you know, Michigan State with George Perlis. And then, you know, Penn State was coming in. But it wasn't just that it wasn't the top game. We learned that how much those games meant to those fan bases back in those days and that noon game. And to me, it was kind of like every week putting together a puzzle, you know, and all week when I talk to people, I kind of say all week as you prepare, you know, the easiest way to put together a puzzle is you put together the edges, because you can always find the edges that get the frame. And all week I prepare for the edges, but I have all these pieces in the middle. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but during the game, you have to kind of trust yourself to tell the story of how the final picture turns out. So no, it's not that I'm not doing the top games. It was just kind of time. I had been talking to Sean. Listen, I'm not stupid. I knew that a lot of people, every time they came up for contract, they wanted to know, was my job available? You know, for 20 years. I don't blame them. Who wouldn't want the top game in the SEC every week, you know, nationally televised at 3:30? And, you know, for years, I was going along on 2, maybe 3-year contracts. And I knew every time I came up, and Sean and I would always talk it up. And then Sean and David and I talked about what do we all want to do here? And I think there was some doubt whether I would even go into the Big Ten because of how closely associated I was to the SEC. And I could have understood that. But we did discuss what the future was. And, you know, I never got to see my son play high school ball. I got to cover him as a college player at Northwestern. But now my grandsons are playing, so I thought about that. And I really am really comfortable with the way this is ending. Been treated great by CBS when, to be honest, you know, there was a lot of conjecture about this, and Sean McManus was great, and now David Burson has been fantastic, and I think we've ended up with a really good plan here.
Okay, Gary, so this is definitely no offense to Brad. We love Brad. Brad does an amazing job. He is great. However, you know, Verne Lundquist is a person who college football. I don't know if there's anybody who's a college football fan who doesn't love Verne Lundquist, and anybody who's met Verne, especially, he's easy to like. So I know you probably have 1,000 stories. Can you give us one? Can you just give us one great Verne Lundquist? This is how cool he is. This is what makes him so darn lovable.
You're right. There are 1,000 of them. I think the time when we snuck Joe Namath into the booth, and I kind of distracted him enough live during an Alabama game, I kind of turned him sideways, and Joe was wearing his fur coat, and he turned around. He said, "Oh my God," just the way Verne can do it. And Joe kissed him on national television. I think Verne has said, "I've seen it all," basically. But there are so many great stories. I know he was so thrilled to do the Army-Navy game, you know, when we got those standalone games, and how he just stared out at those, and how we just enjoyed visiting both the academies, and just how he took it all in. It just felt like a guy who put in 40 years of hard work, and he was finally being recognized, and you could feel the love from everybody in those final 2-3 years that Verne rightly got all the recognition he deserved for what he was to college football.
Gary, I want to pivot back. You got an interesting game this weekend, really good quarterback matchup. Nebraska, Michigan. As I don't know if people know this, but you're a Detroit guy yourself. Right. People look at, I don't know if anyone said this, but maybe Bryce Underwood's the best quarterback to come out of the Detroit area since Gary Danielson.
I think I was more a $9-10 million guy rather than 11-13 million.
Okay, when you see him now, what you've seen, not just against Oklahoma, but even earlier in the year, What jumps out at you? I mean, in terms of this guy was such a hype recruit, as you mentioned, big dollar value attached to him. What are you seeing?
Well, first of all, I don't know if you guys knew this, but I was talking to Dante Moore when I did the Oregon game, and I was asking him about whether he had played against Bryce in high school. And he said, no, we were trying to get a matchup, but we could never get it done. But they both were taught by the same quarterback coach. One of your contemporaries over there at Fox that now works with our friend. A
little behind the scenes here. Gary started to reference a certain figure that I used to work with at Fox, and Stu worked with.
Tim Brown.
And it's a guy.
Right.
We're trying not to mention his name on this podcast. So Tim's partner at Fox, Devin Gardner, old number 98, has mentored quite a few talented young quarterbacks, including the one you're going to see this weekend at Michigan.
Yeah, thanks for filling that in. Sorry about that, guys. Yes. And so I knew about Bryce, and he said he is really good. He wish he could have played against each other, but, Dante is a good player too. When I watch him on tape, I was a little bit surprised by the style he plays. I thought he would be, run the ball and throw the ball, but he is a pocket guy. And much like Dante, he wants to make his living in the pocket. In fact, even the good rushing game he had against Central Michigan, only one of those was a called run. He appears to me, and I don't want to mix teams here too much, but to me, he reminds me of Justin Herbert, the way he plays quarterback. He's big, he has mobility, but he doesn't want to use it. He's not a Josh Allen kind of all over the place when he played at Wyoming. He wants to learn the mechanics of the game and play it the right way. Obviously, he's not there yet, but it's a work in progress, and the way he is improving, you can see it. And the way Michigan improved last year, this is a really interesting game for both Nebraska and Michigan. Nebraska devoted a whole year last year getting done ready for a game like this, and the monkey on their back of not being able to beat a top team. And now Michigan, when you look at their schedule, I mean, the winner of this game would be an interesting competitor to get in that race to be who's number 4. It seems like we know the top 3, barring some big mishap. But the interesting part of college football right now is making the playoffs. And that's why this game early in the year is a really interesting game for both of these programs.
Yeah, I feel like that one. And we also have Indiana, Illinois this week, right?
Yeah.
Are kind of those teams that could end up being in that grouping. Before we go, I want to put you on the spot. But I hope you'll have an answer for this, but it could be tough. 36 years, all those great games. Is there a player who you consider to be the best player you ever called a game from?
No, but the player everybody chooses in Cam Newton would be my choice as the player who did the most with how he played. But I more go back to what I enjoyed most. I've done some of the most famous games. Brent and I did the national championship game with Michael Vick as a true freshman, a jaw-dropping game early in that game when Michael played against, I think as he made one run, I think I shouted to Brent, that's against Florida State he's doing this. I mean, it was an amazing game. But what stands out to me, There's one fabulous game where I think college football changed was that Northwestern game against Michigan, and that 52-50 game when Damian Anderson dropped the sure touchdown pass, and it was almost like two fighters. The Michigan players went over to them and consoled them. They were so much gratitude for playing against each other and how the game was unfolding. And then there's a late fumble and Northwestern wins. Chip Kelly and Urban Meyer were watching that game, and they both traveled to Northwestern, and that game basically changed college football. The next thing that's there's the kick six. There's all these famous games, and I've done almost all of them from Texas, Oklahoma to the Rose Bowl. But it's when special people step up. And I just saw Drew, and Drew came up to me and he said, "You did my favorite game." And I said, "I remember, it's mine too." he threw a late interception. It was his legacy here at Purdue. And they had to beat Ohio State, and he made a lousy play trying to throw the ball away. I think it was Michael Doss intercepted, and Drew knocked him out of bounds at the 1. Ohio State scored, and then Drew came right back on the field and threw a 75-yard touchdown pass to get his team in the Rose Bowl. And then the other one is Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts was humiliated in the national championship game when they put Tua in. He was the SEC Offensive Player of the Year and one of the best players. And he went on some rough times. He was having trouble throwing the ball. They were stacked with wide receivers. Nick made an unbelievable decision to change quarterbacks in the national championship game. And there's Jalen watching his backup make a famous 2nd and 26 throw. But he stuck it out. He took a breath. He stayed at Alabama, and 1 year later in the SEC championship game, Tua gets hurt. And it was Jalen Hurts who came in and rescued that team against Georgia. And it's those human stories that I was a part of, just surviving in the NFL that means the most to me. So I don't know who's the best. You could make a lot of arguments for a lot of guys, but the Stetson Bennettts of the world are the people that I remember the most.
I did not guess that there would be a Damian Anderson reference on this podcast. But
well, my son was the backup quarterback on that team, and he came close to starting, but Zach took that job and ran with it. And he had a great year, and that was a really fun team to watch. So we've been into a lot of places, and I've had a great career. I've enjoyed every minute of it. I love to follow it. You know this. Doing interviews like this is not just you, but all over this country. It's a full-time job. You cannot do this part-time. When somebody in Lincoln, Nebraska asks you what's the key to the game, you better have an answer with some names to it. And, some of the pro guys, they probably make a lot more money than I do. I know that for sure. But nobody's had more fun than I had doing this for all these years.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Well, Gary, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on. We have appreciated watching you for years, and we're going to continue to appreciate you watching you for the rest of this season, and especially Saturday promised, on Nebraska, Michigan.
Sean and David that I'll finish out the way I started. I'm going to do my homework all the way to the Sun Bowl. Our crew, there was talk about me finishing with Army Navy because that's such a great game, but I said, nope, crew's going to El Paso, so am I. So we're going to finish the right way.
Hopefully it goes better for you than it did for Lane Kiffin there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, breakout players. All right, guys, that was a really fun conversation with Gary. Now we're going to turn our attention to the games this weekend and America's favorite new podcast segment. Who is our breakout player of the week? Starting with you, Ralph.
All right. So my breakout player, and I also want to inform the listeners of something. The segments are evolving. The show is evolving. I'm new. YouTube is new. So as we go along, I realize, wow, at a certain point in the season, it's going to be hard to break out because guys have played 10 games. So the general nature of this segment is we're trying to highlight players who are maybe going a little under the radar in their stardom. By week 10, you may have heard of this player, but we're trying to highlight some players that maybe we don't get to early in the week. So again, evolution, folks, evolution. My breakout player sort of already had a breakout game. The only problem is nobody was talking about him or his team when he had a breakout game. Jordan Dwyer is a transfer from Idaho. So FCS transferred now on TCU. He burnt UNC and Bill Belichick left and right on Monday night on Labor Day. So again, like a lot of people were watching Jordan Dwyer do great things, but maybe not really paying attention to how good he is. TCU's played very well. Now, they've only played the 2 games. They beat up on UNC, and then they played Abilene Christian. So they are sort of flying under the radar, too. We're still learning about them. And I think we'll learn a lot this week against a pretty good SMU team, or at least a team that we think will be pretty good. So I'm going to highlight this talented wide receiver in an interesting game between former Southwest Conference rivals.
All right, my turn. I am going to go with a game that is near and dear to my heart because I worked it a few seasons, and that is the Apple Cup. It's a little different now because obviously Washington State and Washington are not in the same conference. Washington State is coming off an atrocious showing. They got absolutely annihilated by North Texas. At one point, I think it was 52-3. It was pretty much that at the end of the game. Jimmy Rogers, the new head coach there, I think he stirred up some of their fan base with his quarterback decision because they barely beat Idaho, the aforementioned Idaho Vandals, in their opener, but they did win that game. He ended up, Jackson Potter, who had been the quarterback he had gone with, threw 3 picks last week, still a young quarterback, struggled. The guy I'm going to spotlight, I'm not sure if he's going to end up getting named as the starter this weekend by Jimmy Rogers, but it's Zevi Eckhouse. Some of you may remember him because he actually played pretty well when they had like half a team in the Holiday Bowl, and they played pretty well against Syracuse because obviously John Mateer had moved on, Jake Dickert, the head coach, had moved on, Ben Arbuckle, they'd all been gone. Zevi Eckhouse is an LA kid who ended up playing at an FCS program in Rhode Island, Bryant University, and played really well. He does not look like he is super talented, but when I ran into one of their somebody really close to the program this summer, I asked him about who's going to be the quarterback, and he was like, "Well, I know one thing: Zevi has the team. They all believe in him." He actually played pretty well when he went in the game last week. I think he will be the guy. I would imagine that's where Jimmy Rogers at some point will land on it. I'm not saying they're going to beat a 3-touchdown favorite in Washington, but the game is in Pullman. Crazy stuff can happen in Pullman. He can run a little bit. He sees the field better than any of the quarterbacks they got. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up playing very well. And again, maybe Washington's looking ahead to Ohio State next week. I don't know, but it's an Apple Cup game. Wild stuff happens. So I'm going to roll with Zevi Eckhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm glad. I'm very glad these two are still, both the Apple Cup and Oregon State are still happening. Obviously, that doesn't always happen, right, when there's a realignment move. But I don't think I realized that, like, these schools aren't just, it's not that they aren't in the same conferences. They're not even in the same weight class anymore, right? It's like Apple Cup in particular was a very even rivalry over the years. Oregon State, not as much, but like Oregon State would pull the upset every so often. And unfortunately now it's like Big Ten school against essentially, WAC school, like Mountain West school. So it doesn't feel quite the same, but Bruce has given us reason to be excited about Wazoo. All right, I'm going to go sticking on the West Coast. I watched a little of that USC Purdue game, and I didn't realize USC has completely new running backs. Like, unless you're a USC fan, you'd probably never heard of these guys before. But I want to spotlight in particular Waymon Jordan, not a transfer portal guy, a JUCO guy. They do still exist, JUCO guys. Number 1 JUCO running back in the country. He's become their number 1 running back. He ran for 167 yards in week 2 against Georgia Southern. Last week's 18 carries for 77 yards. He had a nice touchdown in there. I feel like nobody's talking about USC because they just haven't really played a meaningful game yet, but they will this week if you're willing to stay up for it, right? 11 p.m. Eastern kick, USC against Michigan State. If you're looking for a reason, USC's got itself some new pieces on offense and making people feel a little bit better, or at least a little more encouraged about how Lincoln Riley's team might do this year.
Another reason to keep an eye on that one. LA guys coming home. Aiden Childs, Southern California guy, the Michigan State quarterback, Jonathan Smith, the biggest Dodgers fan in college football coaching, coming back home for this as well. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be past most of their bedtimes, but we'll see if they can pull what would be a pretty big upset, I think.
Can I just say, I love the fact that this podcast, if anything, has a West Coast bias. No, not me. I live literally on the East Coast. But it's good. No, it's a good niche to fill because everything else seems to have an East Coast bias. Everybody tells me and screams at me that we have East Coast bias. So I appreciate and I am embracing the idea that me living in Brooklyn am on a West Coast centric podcast. I like that.
All right, we're going to take a break. And when we get back, it's mailbag time.
And we're back and it's time for the Audible mailbag. First question. Well, this is clearly directed towards you, Bruce, since you're the only one handsome enough of us to be on television. Hi, Bruce. What's the better gig? Sideline reporter is what he tried to say, or in-studio analyst. You've got to pick one, no hedging. And this comes from Brandon.
For Brandon, I would say for me, being in studio is the better gig. I have a lot of respect for sideline reporters. I know that some people are very dismissive of it. I think we know a bunch of people who do it, and they do it really, really well. And some of them, Holly Rowe, Molly McGrath, they've been on our podcast on this show before. It's a challenge because I think you're trying to it's not like the NFL where you're a sideline person and they give you the injury update all the time. You have to be kind of a part snoop, part eavesdropper, all those things, I think, to be really good at it. And I think the ones who are really good at it by how they set your questions up and different things, and a lot of the stuff they do is they help the broadcast out even when they're not on air, even when they're not called on. But for me, why I love studio so much is a couple of things. I get to watch all the games. I'm sitting in the studio. I get to watch with Mike Hill, who's been a longtime friend of mine, and Chris Peterson, who I have a great relationship with. And there's nobody I'd rather watch football with than him, because I can bounce stuff off him all the time. And I just learn so much just from sitting next to him and talking to him about stuff. And I think it helps me that when certain things you're doing a lot of stuff on the fly. And just because I've covered the sport a lot and I talk to a lot of coaches every week, I feel like there's nothing that they're going to throw at me that I should be unprepared for, just because I'm able to pivot or know who's where, or, who's this coordinator, or even if it's because you just don't know who's going to make a play in a given game, especially some of the games we're doing highlights of. But it's just a comfort zone for me. And it just feels much more natural, I think, than that. I mean, last week we had a game with Texas Tech that had like an hour and a half weather delay. So we're in there on the fly, and just, you're just kind of constantly pivoting. But I really like that. It's a good adrenaline rush. I miss my buddies who I worked with on the road at Big Noon. But to me, this is like about as close to the perfect job as I'm gonna get on the TV side, because I just like it. I'm thankful that I had the chance to do sideline for as long as I did. But for me, it's just more in my comfort zone.
Can I bring Stu in here for just a second? You did a little of this though, right? I'm not forgetting that. Like, you did some TV while you were at Fox. That's not like a fever dream, right?
I wasn't a sideline reporter, but yeah, I did a lot of in-studio stuff. I did some, there was that one year, Bruce, that first year that I got there, that Fox Sports Live was still a news show, and they would send you out to do, like, I remember when that was the year Mississippi State was briefly number one in the country. And so, like, on Sunday, it was like, you got to get on a flight Monday to go to Starkville to do a sit-down interview with Dan Mullen, right? It was cool. But I think by the end of it, I was like, I think I'm meant to, I'm much more comfortable sitting in my home office in front of a computer than standing with a mic flag in front of Touchdown Jesus or whatever, doing a 30-second hit.
There is one moment I say I was pleasantly surprised and proud for Stu. So we have an offsite in Southern California every year. It's not just college football people, it's the NFL people at Fox. And the NFL people are the heavyweight people. Like there's like 6 of them at least who are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And so it's like, I don't want to say the college football people are the minor league compared to this, but it kind of, you kind of feel like that going in. And so at one point on our seminar, we each had to do certain kind of talks, but they weren't, too informal. But Stu, I want to say it was like, was it the playoff? What was coming in that they were going to have Stu speak about? And I'm just thinking, like, Stu hadn't done a lot of TV at that point and a lot of presentations. And I vaguely remember Stu before Stephen A. Smith was making like 9 figures in TV, he had a show that nobody watched on ESPN that Stu was once a guest on. And I remember watching it, right?
Well, I bet I was terrible. Yeah.
It was,
I know what I was doing.
It was like, quite frankly, and Stu was on there, and it was just a very weird dynamic, right? But like, so anyway, fast forward to whenever Stu just got to the company, And Stu has to give this little presentation. I'm just thinking, man, Terry Bradshaw's in here. I don't think he's ever heard of Stu.
I remember looking out, Erin Andrews was on her phone. She was not captivated by my presentation.
Yeah, I mean, but it was just like Stu actually did quite well. I was like, I didn't see this coming. It was like, good for you, Stu, because like I think I would have been more nervous in your presentation. Now, granted, I don't know that as cold as you probably do, but just the fact that it's like who is in the room as opposed to like when you're doing TV, it's like we're doing right now. You're looking into a little circle and there's not faces attached to it, right? So I was like, good on Stu. I did not see that coming.
Katie Nolan worked at Fox then. I had just met her. It wasn't like I knew her very well. And I was sitting at a table with her and our old boss, or my old boss. I don't know if he was yours, Matt Schneider. And right before I went up to get up there, she goes, just picture everybody naked. So,
I think we should leave this part of the conversation alone.
Did that help?
No, I think it was because it was my comfort. It was basically the 4-team playoff was just starting. I wrote that little like informational book about it. So it was my sweet spot, right? But also the people at Fox, Kent, Bardia, like Jason Kleiman, they do a great job like helping, right? Like they have to do it with like these athletes that come in that have never done TV before. I'm sure I'm an easier case than that.
Please tell me that's the last time. Please tell us that's the last time you pictured Tim Brando naked, by the way.
I don't think I actually did it, but just like having her make a joke right before I went on kind of helped like make me less nervous. All right, next question from Craig in Washington, D.C. He's bringing back up the Brian Kelly press conference. He said he was a bit surprised to hear our defense of him because he thought, he said during the LSU-Florida game, my friends and I were genuinely puzzled by the offense's performance. I want to skip down to this part, though, where he says, while I appreciate the improvements on defense, especially with the rehiring of coaches that Brian Kelly initially let go, it feels like this season's potential might be slipping due to the offensive struggles. I don't see this team making the playoffs, especially with the schedule ahead. Where am I wrong? It's a pretty... I feel like the rest of us are, Bruce and I on Sunday are like, we think LSU is the team to beat in the SEC. He has quite a different perspective. Ralph, do you think that his concern is merited?
I do, and I think you're both wrong. I don't think LSU is. In fact, I remember listening because I always listen to the show if I'm not on it. And I remember listening, thinking like, "Oh, I don't agree with these guys at all." Like, I don't think that, like. And this goes back to what I was talking about. I hate to always bring it back to the poll, but like, I find myself sitting here with like LSU at number 2 because of that good win in the first week of the season, and now 3 weeks in, I'm like, I got to move these guys. Like, they're not that. Like, this offense is a problem. Like. They had offensive line questions coming in that have not been resolved. They had problems running the ball last year with 2 NFL tackles that have not been resolved. Like I get Kelly not loving that question, just to be clear. Like, I'm with you guys on like, hey man, like my first question after a 10-point win in an SEC game, that might not be great question protocol, but I have not looked at LSU. It's great to win. Winning is the most important thing, but I find myself feeling like, yeah, the rug's going to get pulled out from under LSU. Like this thing that they're doing here, I don't think is sustainable to win the SEC. I will throw this to you guys because obviously you made yourself clear on LSU. I don't put you in a little pickle here, but can you think of any other teams that have won so far this season? We talked about Notre Dame losing and still being a possible contender, where you think, yeah, this team's won a few games and technically they're highly ranked, but boy, like they have a fatal flaw here that I think is going to undermine them from what I've seen so far.
Where it's kind of like fool's gold is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think LSU might be a little bit of fool's gold. Like I think this offense is again, it's a problem because it's reminding me of some of the issues they had last year.
You're not alone. I have a buddy who is a former NFL player, not to name drop, but former NFL player who played at LSU. We were texting about this the other morning. And the issue, and I kind of frame it this way, I'm not saying the running game isn't a concern. I think it is. Whether it's a problem or a concern, I think that's your perspective. But it's like can't run the ball or won't run the football. Like there's two kind of different things. And I think this person and I were talking about whether, is Joe Sloan, the offensive coordinator who came from Louisiana Tech, seems to like to throw it probably a lot more. Is that part of the problem? The commitment to running the football. They bring in Alex Atkins, former offensive line guy, to be the tight ends coach and hopefully ramp up the run game. We'll see. I don't know. I mean, I got to be honest, like in some ways, there's a little similarity to me to Alabama. Like Ty Simpson's played lights out the last couple of weeks, but I do worry about them a little bit with how committed and how good they are at running the football, right? And so I get it. That would be the other one. Obviously, they lost their first game, but that would be the other one where like, I don't know. They're going to play Georgia, and can they win being heavily one-dimensional? I don't know. Stu, where are you on this?
Well, I actually have a different team to throw out there that I think might be even more surprising to say, which is Penn State.
I was hoping you would go there, Stu. Good job.
They were my national title pick. They're number one. I know Ralph loves the numbers. They have played they have yet to play a team ranked better than 112th in SP plus, right? So you would think against 3 cupcakes with Drew Aller, with the 2 running backs, with the new receivers, they must be tearing it up on offense, right? They are not. They have not been bad, but they have not been great. They are 42nd in the country in yards per play, and they're about to play Oregon. You said you were glad I brought it up. Are you sharing this concern?
I am. Again, to the extent that I think Penn State's a fraud and it's all going to fall apart. No, I wouldn't go there, but I found myself definitely over the first 3 weeks, and I've said this on other shows, like I don't like to put too much stock on these non-competitive games because it's, to be clear, none of those games was competitive. Penn State, even in the worst case scenario against FIU when they were only leading 10-0 at halftime, never felt really threatened. So I often feel like those games are skewed, like the performances in those games are hard to get a handle on. But I have absolutely noted what you have noted, and I find myself now thinking about the Oregon game a little differently than I would have heading into the season. I feel like the gap has closed there, especially considering how Oregon has so efficiently on offense dispatched its poor opponents.
Can I, before we pivot to the next question, can I just offer this? They have 3 new transfer receivers in there. That was an issue for them last year. I wonder if Andy Kotelnicki is really workshopping. He knows he's got 2 stud running backs, right? And Katron Allen's looked really good. Katron Allen, I know this from talking to people there and close to Katron Allen. This is the best shape he's been in it to go into a season in a couple of years because he was banged up coming into the season, so wasn't in great shape. And so he picks it up usually at the end of the year, and now he looks really good. I just think that, again, maybe I'll be proven wrong, in a couple of weeks, but I just think this is them kind of working through. The receivers have looked very good, a bunch of contested catches. All 3 guys have stepped up. I know they feel better about that piece, and I think that was probably something they were trying to workshop more than the other stuff.
Yeah, I'm just glad you brought it up, Stu. I think it was worthy of this particular topic. I think Penn State is worthy of that conversation. I feel a little more concerned about LSU than I do Penn State, but I'm glad you brought Penn State into this.
Right.
I mean, it frankly speaks to the poll thing with Notre Dame last week, right? Like, oh, they're 0-2, they're awful. We got to get them out of there. Well, what might Penn State be if they had opened with Miami and Texas A&M, right? Like, we're going to reward Penn State for just kind of going through the motions and taking your business, but we're going to kill Notre Dame for these 2 close losses to good teams. All right, you're right. We got to move on.
All right, let's get on to the poll thing, as you referred to it. This is from Dan in Washington, D.C. The debate about Notre Dame's AP ranking seems to be about the question of, quote, best versus, quote, most deserving. That has always been an issue Stu and I have kind of harped on. Ralph, do you think there is a danger that focusing on, quote unquote, best eases the path for famous brands by giving them a built-in excuse for losing while making the mountain harder to climb for smaller brands?
So I do think, again, we'll relate it back to the AP poll for a second. People always say, well, what's the bias this? And this person's bias, that person's bias, and this bias is, the bias gets thrown around a lot. And I have a feeling a lot of people use it without it being well defined. The one place where I think that there is a subconscious, unconscious, something along those lines, bias is towards bigger brands. But there's an underlying element of truth to the idea of like, I'm going to give the bigger brands a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And what I would always describe to people, I have 100 years of data that says that USC is better at football than Oregon State. So if I'm kind of choosing between these two programs, I'm probably going to give a lean towards USC. And that means that those programs, the smaller brands, probably do have a little tougher hill to climb. But I also think that you end up playing, like, this discussion leads to almost a little bit of like intellectual dishonesty, where do I have to then say that a Mountain West victory, let's just pull them in. Let's just pull Boise State. Do I now have to like say that beating a mid-tier Mountain West team is the same as beating a mid-tier SEC team or a mid-tier Big 12 team? Is a mid-tier Big 12 team as good as a mid-tier SEC team? Maybe could be. But I also like, sometimes we get we harp so much on brands that we stop sort of evaluating the actual teams themselves. So I don't want to move away too much and say, well, yes, the big brands always get the benefit of the doubt. They tend to, but sometimes there's real evidence behind that suggests they should in some cases, right? Again, I don't think, not all teams are equal. So when we talk about best and most deserving, that's where that has to be weighed. And why you end up with a 9-3 SEC team, you have to give that team serious consideration because of the competition it has played. That doesn't mean you have to give them a complete pass, but you do have to give that a little different weight than maybe what a 10-2 or 11-1 team does in another conference. It's threading a needle, and I don't know if there's a good answer that's going to satisfy everybody, but you also can't just like, on face value, just determine all wins are equal.
It's human nature. Like when you're talking about the word bias, I mean, I just think it's human nature that you're going to lean into the brands than the programs that have proven to be like more reliably good. I think where it burns us the most is we're slow to recognize that a team is really bad, right? Like early last season, Florida State, they've got talent, right? They always have talent. They'll get it together. Well, maybe not, right? Like there's always going to be, maybe Bruce and I are too biased toward what we thought LSU was going to be, right? Like maybe we just haven't caught up to that. The strangest one to me in the poll this week is, okay, you want to say like an AAC team, right, does not play the kind of schedule that an SEC team does. That's absolutely correct. But we are in the non-conference portion of the schedule where Tulane has beaten 2 Power 4 teams, and they're not even close to being ranked. They're 32nd, I think, 32nd or 33rd.
I had them 25th, and I'm getting heat from Vanderbilt fans. Of all people, Vanderbilt fans are coming after me because I didn't have Vanderbilt ranked this week. And by the way, maybe I should have. I honestly, like, you can make a good case for Vanderbilt, but I went with Tulane at the bottom of my rankings.
And that's fine. I mean, you could see Vanderbilt's 20th in the AP poll as a whole. That might be too generous. I'm not sure. But the point is, like, I get it that once you get into conference play, it's hard to justify jumping UNLV up the poll, right? Because of who they're playing. But if we're not going to reward them for what they're doing out of conference, like what are we doing? Like, why are we like, maybe they should just be disqualified from the poll altogether. I don't know. So it is time to give out our Trader Joe's $12 gift card. We have 3 questions here to choose from. I feel like we ended up going into depth on all of them. I'll start with you, Ralph. Who gets your vote?
Again, I tend to try to steer away from the the poll questions here. I'll go with the question about LSU because I think it led us to a nice place to, dive into a couple of other teams, including Penn State. I think a Penn State conversation was good to be had, even though the Nittany Lions are essentially hiding from us while playing a soft non-conference schedule for the first 3 weeks.
Bruce.
All right, I wanted to give Brandon the gift because he asked a question about me. So in total self-indulgence, I mean, it should be him. But I think I would go with what Ralph just said because honestly, he got something really good out of both of you. I thought I wasn't thinking Penn State because I have my own, I kind of, as I said, my own rationale a little bit about that. But I like that you guys kind of shined a light on something else. So that's probably a better spot for me.
Well, in that case, my vote doesn't matter, so I'm going to give it to Brandon because he gave me a reason to tell my story of Bruce. Wait a minute, it's got to go to Brandon because it caused a very rare moment in this podcast history, which was Bruce complimented me on something. I mean, it took this question, and also, by the way, 11 years after the fact.
You can override us, Stu, and just hand it out.
No, I do not have veto power, okay. And I agree. I did not expect to go into, first of all, I did not expect Ralph to say you guys are wrong about LSU and then for us to go into the Penn State thing. So Craig in Washington, D.C., please send your mailing address to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. And everybody else, you can send your email questions for next week to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. And remember to watch us on YouTube at Audible Show. Join us there Sunday morning at 11:30 Eastern, 8:30 Pacific for a live breakdown of this weekend's games. We'll see you then.